Well, OPIC is the U.S. government's development finance institution, and I think we're probably best known in Africa for having supported housing projects, microfinance, energy projects, and other types of infrastructure. But actually one of our biggest portions of the portfolio in sub-Saharan Africa is in the water sector. We have worldwide supported U.S. private sector investment upwards of $1 billion historically. The current portfolio is about $750 million, and half of that is in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have been there using all of our product lines, project finance, political risk insurance to help companies mitigate some of the risks that John mentioned, and most recently helping to capitalize private sector managed private equity funds, which are able to put in equity into smaller water projects around the continent. We also work very closely with our U.S. Department of Commerce, which is identifying water projects where American companies can invest in sub-Saharan Africa. Certainly USAID, the Agency for International Development, is doing a lot of work in the water sector, and the closest organizations that we work with in the U.S. government financing family are the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, USTDA, which provides a lot of feasibility study funding, mainly in this sector, to municipal and national governments to identify projects in the water and sanitation sector. And then when there's U.S. procurement, the U.S. Export-Import Bank can provide very cost-effective financing in the sector. The types of projects that we've been involved in Africa have mainly been desalinization, distribution of water, in East Africa, drilling, helping companies drill water and then maintain the wells and set up small distribution companies in villages that are not connected to a major supply of water. And then increasingly we're looking to the wastewater and sanitation facility. I mentioned our three product lines. I think replicating what we've done with the political risk insurance product in the energy sector, we're looking at private companies that are signing contracts, management contracts with state-owned water companies, because OPIC can provide the kind of political risk insurance that will mitigate the risk, including renegotiation of contracts and potential changes in the feed-in tariff, if you will, in the sector. Thank you.
Yeah. What advice would you give us to those to make them bankable for corporations like yours to make investments?
Well, it's interesting because in the two, I would call off-grid water projects that we've been involved with in Kenya and most recently in India, the U.S. investors, if you will, are not-for-profit entities. In the case of Kenya, it's a religious organization which brings its contributions from its members into the project as its equity, if you will. And then we look at it as a commercial project. We look at the cash flows that they generate. They tend to be smaller projects, so what we focus on is the scalability that is in the business plan. We don't want to be involved or spend our resources, including human resources, looking at projects that just perform this in one or two villages. We're looking for companies that will come in and do a small number and then really use the OPIC proceeds to be able to scale up. So we're perfectly comfortable doing those small projects, but we want to work with companies or entities that are really willing to look at the long-term opportunities and leverage our capital to scale up projects in a way they might not be able to do if they were just doing it with their own funds.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.